This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our thoughtful bold leader today joins us from Harvard, across the Charles River from Boston in the United States of America. She is Harvard's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs Associate and is the Deputy Director of the International Conflict Analysis and Resolution Program. She is an author, a BBC consultant, and an international expert in conflict resolution, a peacemaker. She worked with South Africa's late and great Archbishop Desmond Tutu on a BBC series on conflict resolution in Northern Ireland. Her international work takes her to countries like Northern Ireland, North and South America, Cuba, Palestine, Israel, Libya, Colombia, Sri Lanka, and many more. Stay tuned as she shares with us what dignity is versus respect. Why dignity is the unspoken human conversation to resolve conflicts, and how leading with dignity can resolve conflicts, both big and small, systemic and personalized indignities, and help create a culture to bring out the best in all people. We warmly welcome my dear friend, my bookend, Dr. Donna Hicks, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. So Donna, my friend, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for being part of this amazing conversation on dignity.
It is my pleasure, Anne. Thank you.
You've written 2 books, and I was curious about dignity. One, dignity, its essential role in resolving conflict, and a second, leading with dignity and how to create a culture that brings out the best in people. 2 very valuable books. What attracted you to this area of dignity, and why do you think it's so important in the world of work and in life?
Well, dignity, I realized in retrospect, was following me around all my life. I wasn't aware of it until I started my professional career as an international conflict resolution professional. And I had the privilege of sitting down with parties in conflict, trying to help them have dialogues about the issues that divided them. And I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in Asia, in Africa, North America, South America. I mean, wherever there was an intractable international conflict, my organization at Harvard, called the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution, we were often asked to go in and help the parties have a discussion instead of, killing each other. I did that for probably a decade before I realized that I thought we were having the wrong conversation to start these dialogues, because the conversation that we were having had to do with the political issues that were dividing the parties. And of course, we have to talk about, like in the Middle East, we have to talk about a 2-state solution. We have to talk about, the refugees, the settlements, all of that. But what I realized after sitting at those tables, and it didn't matter where we were, yes, it was happening in the Middle East, but it was also happening in Sri Lanka and Colombia, Northern Ireland, all these other places, Libya. I realized that there was another conversation taking place at these tables, but it had no words. It was a silent conversation, except for the fact that I had, being a psychologist, I listen for what isn't being said at the table. And I realized that there was such an emotional turmoil going on within the parties. And I always thought about this second conversation as happening under the table. And so I thought, oh my gosh, every time, one of them would blow up, have a big reaction. And I thought, gosh, we've got to be able to talk about that. What was that? What happened there? And, so for a while I thought about, oh, these are emotional reactions. We have to, of course, they were emotional. But when I would ask the parties, can we discuss this? Can we discuss that emotional outburst? And they would say, emotional? We're not emotional. We're just responding to injustice. We're just, So I said, okay, can't use that word emotions. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to start thinking about trauma, because I think these emotional responses are about being so traumatized for so long and nobody really paying attention to that trauma. So the next time I tried using the word trauma, I said, my gosh, I can see that you're having a real traumatic response here, and it's completely understandable. And they would say to me, oh God, Anne, it was so funny. They would say to me, trauma? This is not about trauma. This is about injustice. This is about, oh God. So I realized all those words weren't working. And then one day I was in Sri Lanka doing one of these similar dialogues, and something just hit me like a rocket. And I said, if I were to put words to this unspoken conversation, it would have something to do with like saying, how dare you treat us this way?
Yeah.
Don't you see we're human beings? Can't you see we're suffering and you're doing nothing about it? And I thought, this is about their dignity. This is about their dignity. And so the moment I realized that, I said, okay, I'm going to try it out. Another, the next time I convene a dialogue happened to be in Latin America. And so I was presented to this group of conflicting parties in Latin America. And I was supposed to be doing a kind of classic mediation. And I said, folks, I said, I've been struggling here with what I think is the human dimension to these conflicts that never gets discussed. And I said, I've been all over the world trying to help parties have these conversations. And I can tell you that I believe that so much of what isn't being said has to do with your dignity. And would you be willing to have a conversation about the ways in which you feel your dignity has been assaulted by this conflict? That was the magic. That word had magic. It had magic. And they said, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what's happening here. Our dignity is not being recognized. Yeah. So, it was one of those things that once I saw it and once I recognized that it was an underlying human response to being treated as if you didn't matter. So that's how it happened. That's how it happened.
And to that point, I mean, that's a wonderful segue into how do you define it? And I know, having read your amazing books, that, you talk about people's inherent worth. So if you had to give us your precise definition, how would you define dignity?
Oh, gosh. Well, this definition came with a lot of help from the beloved Archbishop Desmond Tutu as well. Okay. So I can just say that I realized, having worked so many different places or with people all over the world with this same the response to assaults to dignity, I realized it's a highly emotional event, highly emotional. And I didn't want to get all fancy Harvard analytical about this. I realized I had to be crystal clear about what I mean about dignity. And it's simply this, that dignity is our inherent, inborn value and worth. And on top of that, it is our inborn vulnerability to having that dignity assaulted. So simple, everybody can understand that definition, including little kids, because we're teaching this in schools now. So that was it. And the way I pointed out that Archbishop Tutu helped me with this is because he was really crystal clear that this dignity that we're born with never leaves us. Nobody can actually take it away from us. It can be assaulted, it can be traumatized, it can be injured, but at the end of the day, it is always there with us. But if we let it go, if we decide we think we have our dignity stolen from us or stripped from us, then we've got problems. So Tutu said to me, Donna, you have to impart with every single group that you talk to, you have to remind them that they have dignity and that nobody can take it away from them. Yes, again, it can be injured and you need to heal from that. But he said to me, how do you think we got through apartheid in South Africa? How do you think we got through this? Because we knew, he told me, makes me want to weep, actually. He said, we knew that our dignity was in our hands and our hands only. And he talked about Mandela, and he said, Mandela understood this profoundly. And I even call this now, this awareness of our dignity, Mandela Consciousness, because he really spread this notion along with Archbishop Desmond Tutu that, nobody's going to take our dignity from us. We're never going to give it up, Mandela says, not for any man or any institution. It is in our hands and our hands only. So I think, as simple as all that is, Anne, I can tell you most of the people with whom I work around the world or anywhere, they haven't yet claimed their dignity.
So that leads me into two more questions. And those are, of course, having lived through that era of apartheid, and having felt the assault on dignity in so many traumatic ways and places, what would you define as the distinction between dignity and respect, which often people seem to confuse? And I know that you've shared that dignity is inherent, it cannot be taken away, and respect has to be earned. Why do you think people confuse these two, and how is it easy for people to differentiate between the two?
Well, I think people confuse it because they just don't understand it. Dignity, again, as you just pointed out, dignity is something that is with us until we leave this planet. Who knows, in the afterlife, we certainly will have it as well. But oftentimes my parties and my conflicts that I was working with would say that one of the reasons why we're fighting is to restore that dignity. And they would say, and we demand respect. We demand respect. And I would say to them, wait a minute, you can't demand respect. But what you can demand is to be treated like the human being that you are. You can demand to be treated with dignity because every single one of us has it. And I would say to them, look, if we separate this issue of dignity and respect has to be earned. That's way down the road, if it ever comes. And I said, but dignity is something we can work with. We could help educate each other about dignity. We can talk about it. We can heal from it together. But you're never going to get somebody who's been in conflict for 100 years or treated as if they're less than human to respect the people who, that's a bit of what I call a bridge too far. But we can't get people to treat each other with dignity, no matter how bad the relationship was.
Yeah, it's an important distinction. You made a point earlier that dignity's been following you around for a long time. I was wondering, could you take us back in time to a defining moment in your young life, a specific event or incident where you felt that your own dignity was being challenged, or an event that defined your path in terms of where you are and the work you're doing today? Is there a defining moment that shaped this work?
Well, I think it happened more sort of over time, but I grew up in a family that was a very conflicted family. My father was a member of the, his ancestry came over here with on the Mayflower. And my mother, on the other hand, was a first generation Polish immigrant. And the two of them, they fell in love in high school, got married, but that's about as far as the joy lasted. because once they started having kids, and there was 5 of us in my family, the conflict that came up between my sort of traditional Yankee, father's family, which were very proper and all of that, and my mother's Polish farmer family, because they had a beautiful farm and they were wonderful, but they mixed like oil and water.
Yeah.
They mixed like oil and water, and there was so much conflict all of the time. And I was basically, as a little kid, I remember thinking, wait a minute, there's something not right here. There's something not right here, especially when my father would call my mother a stupid Polak and stuff like that. And here's my poor mother, and I'm thinking, we can do better than this. We can. And I remember in kindergarten going into school thinking, I got to get out of this. This is not right that my parents are treating each other and us. We were also not treated very well. So that when I say it followed me around all my life, but yet at the same time, I also knew that I was going to dedicate my life to this. I knew it. I had this, and I grew up in a tiny town with 2,500 people. I was the first one to go to college, and forget about getting. It's in upstate New York. It was a little town called Stephentown. Okay. And so I just had this internal message, and I don't know how else to call it. I mean, very religious people might say it was God's voice or something, but I just had this internal drive that I had to get out there. And I knew even in high school, I had to do international work. But if you could see the environment in which I came, and they used to call me Hicks from the sticks. But I was driven. I was driven by, and I kept following my path. One door would lead to another, and then I'd open that door and move there. And, I finally got my PhD and started working. I got a fellowship at Harvard with Professor Herbert Kellman, who is my beloved mentor, who just recently passed. And those doors opened. And then I already told you the end of the story, where the dignity word came to me. And I realized why I have such a fierce determination around it, because I lived it, from a very young age. I not only lived in dignity, but I witnessed it on a daily basis. And once you start feeling it, and as a kid, I felt it. I didn't know what the word was in my head yet, but it changed me. I mean, in some ways, all of that abuse was a blessing, because I did something about it. I transformed it. It kind of was like alchemy. I transformed all of those bad experiences into where I am today, those 2 books that you were talking about.
Can you take us back to one particular event, Donna, where this issue around where dignity played a significant role, or the lack of expression of one's own dignity, or an assault on somebody's dignity? Is there a particular example you can cite for us, a particular event which was pretty heated? And what was the light bulb moment?
There's so many, but one that I actually wrote about in one of the books was we were having a dialogue. I don't really want to say what the conflict was, because I don't want to. I just want to. We're having a dialogue at Harvard. The parties came to Harvard, and one of the participants on one side of the conflict was trying to explain what life was like for them in his community. And
can we which countries? I mean, can we contextualize?
Well, it was Israeli-Palestinian. It was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and one of the Palestinians was trying to explain what everyday life was like, especially going through the checkpoints and being so humiliated. I mean, this is common knowledge. Everybody knows about this. This isn't. And so as he was he was almost in tears in his description. And I'm sitting there at the other end of the table with my co-facilitator, a guy who was sitting next to me. The 2 of us were sitting, there's always 3 of us facilitating. And one of the Israelis just ignored what this guy had said and started out on another topic entirely. And I could see this Palestinian guy, he pushed back from the table, sat there like this for about 30 seconds. Then he got up. And he left. And I said to my co-facilitator, I said, oh my God, so-and-so just left. I've got to go see what happened. And he said, oh, he's fine. Don't worry about it. He's fine. And I said, I don't think he's fine. So I waited a minute and I just got up, and facilitators rarely leave the table. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to. That's not part of what we do, is leave the table. But I felt like I had to go after him. I had to see if he was okay, because he was so visibly not okay to me. And so I went out, and he was sitting on this little couch, just a few feet from the door, and he was in tears. And I said, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" And he said, "No, I'm not. I'm not okay. I can't do this." And I said, "Look," I said, "I just want you to know that I heard you. I heard what you said. I heard how difficult life was like for you, and not only just for you, but for your community." And I said, "I just want to say how sorry I am." That's all I did. I just acknowledged him in that way.
In your work on leading with dignity, you talk about the dignity model and the 10 elements of dignity. Can you just share with us what those 10 ingredients are, and just perhaps a brief, view around why that element is critical?
So what I did was, once I recognized the importance of dignity, I realized that, yes, this was the missing link in my understanding of conflict. But at the same time, I had no idea really what it looked like on a day-to-day basis. What would it look like if you had your dignity honored? Or what would it look like if you had your dignity violated? Give me the scenario. So I decided that I wanted to interview people. I interviewed people and I asked them, tell me about a time when you felt your dignity was violated, or tell me about a time when you felt your dignity was honored. I basically gave them the choice. And just incidentally, most people talked about the way their dignity had been violated. They had very few stories about the way it was honored.
And can you share the sample, the kinds of people you were talking to?
All over the world. I sampled people from all over. I didn't go to Antarctica, but but I was pretty much, because I have students from all over the world too. So it was really easy getting that sample. And so what struck me was that no matter where I was in the world asking these questions to the people, they had a very similar story. I mean, the context might have been different because of the cultural influences and so on. But when it came down to the emotional reaction that people were having, I came up with 10 specific ways in which people felt that they wanted their dignity honored. The first one had to do with identity. People want their identity accepted no matter who they are, no matter their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their physical capability. People want to be thought of as equal in dignity. And, I always say, this is really important because we may differ in status, but at the end of the day, we are all equal in dignity. And that's what they want. That's what people want in terms of having their identity accepted. They want recognition for their unique qualities and ways of life. And the way this also influences the workplace, for example, people want to be recognized for a job well done, or thank you, given a pat on the back. People want to be included, and want to feel like they belong. If you're in a situation, in a conflict, and your people are being marginalized and displaced, that's one of the fundamental desires, is to create a sense of belonging for everyone, for all people. People want acknowledgement for the suffering that they've endured. And Tutu helped me with this one as well by saying, look, when people, he said to me, Donna, when people have been roughed up, they need acknowledgement for what they've been through. And basically, I learned that. And, the story I just told you before about the Palestinian who I acknowledged And that's an example of acknowledgement. Fairness. People want to be treated fairly. People want to be given the benefit of the doubt. People want a sense of safety where they are. And it's not just physical safety, where that's critically important, of course, but people also want to feel psychologically safe, that they can be who they are, their authentic selves, no matter what environment they're in. What else? Let's see. Acknowledgement, fairness, accountability. People want an apology when something bad happens to them. We want to hear, gosh, I'm really sorry for doing that. And what's critical about apology is it's not just I'm sorry and I'm sorry I did that to you, but I'm sorry and I will work really hard at not ever doing that again. So that second piece usually gets sidelined, but that's the important aspect about accountability.
Also, an apology without conditions, not I'm sorry.
Yeah, without conditions. Exactly. Just, in fact, I was thinking about apology recently and deciding I needed to develop an exercise to help people do that, figure out how to do it well. Because I have one for acknowledgement. I have one for, many other things, and the last one is understanding. People want to be understood. And, it's so painful for people when somebody rushes to judgment about who they are based on some stereotype or people want to be able to have time to talk about what their life experience is. And to seek deeper understanding is one of the most powerful ways of demonstrating that you see the dignity and worth in other people.
Donna, that raises such an interesting question in my own mind. In the current model of top-down command control, the typical hierarchical systems we see in organizations, and this notion that I'm more senior to you, therefore I'm superior to you, how do you define the distinction between, for executives who say, look, I may be unconsciously not being respectful of people's dignity. How do you guide those people in defining the distinction between, yes, you may appear to be on a more senior level, you're paid more by the organization, you have a title that wields more power, but yet, you're equal in dignity. How do you help those people understand that distinction?
First of all, it's that question is one of the reasons why I wrote that second book, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People. Because when I started, after my first book was published, I was asked to go into the corporate world. I realized that some of these same human factors that were, taking place in the workplace were very similar to the issues that were dividing parties in these big conflicts. And again, it's a focus on that human dimension, on the dignity of people. And so when I went in to I remember my first foray was, in this massive organization, this big corporation. And, the leadership team they're wonderful people, but they were so ignorant of issues related to dignity. Like you said, they felt like, okay, I've achieved this power and this authority here, and I'm superior. I make the decisions. I do this, I do that. That's just what they were taught in business school, how to, the command and control methodology, way of, leading people. And I thought, I saw it over and over and over again. And it wasn't just in that big corporation, it was in other smaller organizations as well. And I thought, what, the ignorance surrounding this issue of dignity is so huge that it's having such an impact on people. And we're not even conscious of it. Okay, how do I introduce this to a team of, executives? How do I do this? And I realized that the one thing that I felt was absolutely necessary was to try to take the shame out of it, because I wasn't there to tell them, hey, look, you're screwing up here. You're not leading your people well. They don't like you. It's a toxic work environment. All these words that I was hearing from the employees. And so I would say to them, I said, look, I had to study dignity. I spent 10 years of my professional career studying dignity to get to the core of it. And if you've never been exposed to that, you're not going to know. And I would say good people with good intentions violate dignity because of ignorance. And so that kind of takes the sting out of it. And, by saying, hey, look, you were never exposed. When did you learn about dignity in school? Did you ever take a course in business school called Dignity 101? You never did. Now it is. That's another great story. But this is the whole point, that the only way we can get people to hold up the mirror and look at the impact of their actions on other people is if you don't shame them. And so it's a nice way out. And it's the truth. The truth is we're not exposed to this. So that is the reason why I decided I had to write that second book about leadership. Because the thing is, if the leaders are conscious of dignity, if they embody dignity consciousness, or what I call Mandela Consciousness, if they embody it, the people are going to watch. People watch leadership. They see everything that they're doing. And if they see that employees see that their leaders are taking responsibility for the mistakes they make, or saying, yes, I messed up, I'm sorry, then they're going to feel free and safe to do the same thing. So, but again, the only way to do this is to be able to get people to open their eyes to the impact of their behavior on others. If you use shame, those doors close real fast.
Of course. And I guess the follow-up question for me is for the diehards, Donna, the people who say, but I am superior. I have more weight in this organization. I do have more impact. What do you say to them?
Well, I say you may differ in status, but you're equal in dignity. That's my simple response. Yes, you have more power, you have authority, you have status and decision-making powers that the people under you don't have, but it doesn't give you permission to treat them as anything less than a human being just like you, who is born with dignity. I think that notion, because in my definition of accepting identity, I say, keep in mind that you're neither inferior nor superior to others. That's part of the learning. And that's all I can say, is that it takes a while for some of the diehards to let go of that, because it's such a traditional business paradigm that you are the one, that you have all the power and the influence. And I think that's the hardest one to let go of on the part of the traditionalists, people who believe in this old command and control leadership style.
Yeah. And, I just, I'd love to go back to, you were referencing the wonderful Archbishop Desmond Tutu earlier. And I know you've worked with him. You were an advisor to the BBC. You worked on a program looking at perpetrators and victims of the conflict in Northern Ireland. And I think you created the BBC created 3 television shows called Facing the Truth. Can you take us back to a particular moment where perhaps in that conflict and working with perpetrators and victims, where perpetrators did have this feeling of superiority? And was there a particular moment where there was a light bulb moment that they suddenly got it, that actually I'm not superior, that in fact we are equal in dignity? Is there a particular example that you and the Arch worked on that you could share with us?
Well, there's one that I wrote about in the book, actually, the first book, where I walked through what happened, one of the transformative moments that took place in these dialogues. Because one of the things we wanted to be sure to do was to give both parties, the victim and the perpetrator, equal opportunity to tell their story. What happened to them, why they decided to do what they did. And in this one episode, we had a British police officer and a IRA guy, volunteer, who were, the IRA guy almost killed the British police officer. And they were brought together to see if there could be any hope for reconciliation, because that was the whole purpose of the program, because the conflict was still, the emotional parts of the conflict were still alive in Belfast, and we would try to figure out how to get to the core of that and maybe achieve reconciliation. And so one of the things we did was he let them talk and talk and talk. We probably sat there for 6 or 8 hours with each couple, but then it was edited down to a 45-minute program. But one of the defining moments was when, after the IRA volunteer, his name was Ronnie, after Ronnie told his story about what life was like growing up in Northern Ireland as an Irish Catholic, what that was like, what he went through, the kind of humiliation he experienced in terms of the British feeling, you know, the Unionists feeling more superior to the Irish Catholics. And so Malcolm, who was the British police officer, sat there and listened and listened and listened and asked a few questions. And at one point, Malcolm said to Ronnie, you know, Ronnie, I'm sitting here listening to you tell your story about what your life was like, and you had somebody shot next to you. And, you know, I have a feeling that if I had grown up under those same circumstances and had the same experiences that you had, I probably would have done exactly the same thing. I would have done the same thing. Wow. And it was this talk about acknowledgement. Ronnie was blown away. He did not expect Malcolm, the so-called superior part, you know, the superior-inferior dynamic there. Malcolm is saying, no, listen, I probably would have done the same thing. And that shift, you could even see it. People can watch it. You can go on YouTube and watch this episode, because you could see that emotional, it's like Ronnie let go of something in that moment. There's something just shifted. And I let go. So did Malcolm, for that matter. It was both a letting go and a release of, you know, like an old conflict narrative about who the people were.
What did you learn from the Arch, Donna? What stood out most significantly for you?
Well, I spent 2 whole weeks watching him, just observing the way he treated people, and the way he treated some of the perpetrators. You know, I remember going to him one day and I said, Arch, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to open my heart to one, because we had a perpetrator who was, you know, really vicious in the way he killed people. And I thought, I don't know if I can extend empathy, you know, if I can. And I said, what should I do?
Examples of what the Arch did. I mean, can you give us sort of specific tangibles around what he did in that situation?
What that would look like? Well, he would just stay laser focused and listen to every single word that person was saying. And so in a minute, you'll see what I think he was doing by what he told me to do. And so I said, how do you do this? How do you just stay focused? And he had these loving looks on it. You know, this was a man who taught me about love more than anything else. And, you know, about how the absence of love, what they can do to a human being, the absence of love, and what we can justify within ourselves if we are not feeling loved ourselves. And, you know, a lot of unloved people are dignity violators, you know, by the way. Yes. And so he would just look at them, and he had these penetrating, empathic looks, and he would lean in, and, you know, he would say, tell me more, and what was that like for you? And so I said, you know, in preparation for one of these filmings, I said, I don't know if I can do it. And I said, help me. And I said, what should I do? I said, when I can't get through to his dignity, what should I do? And you know what he said to me? Just keep on digging. If you can't get to it, just keep on digging, because you'll find it. It'll be in there. And I think that sounds so simple and kind of funny, you know, just keep on digging, because that's what he would do. He would use humor all the time to make points when we were debriefing or something like that. So that was one huge one right there. If you can't feel it, if you can't genuinely feel it, that person's dignity, just keep on digging for it.
I love it, Donna. And, you know, as you and I have shared and spoken about, we're bookends. You know, you had this wonderful connection with the Arch. And of course, I had the incredible privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela, which kind of moves me into the next question. What for you stands out as the most significant Mandela moment for you? I know you've written about Mandela in your book. Is there a particular event that stands out that hugely inspires you, shapes you, and continues to inspire the work you do?
In fact, it's similar with Mandela and Tutu, actually, because I remember reading, he wrote his I never did meet him, but he wrote in his autobiography that there were times when he was being treated really badly. He or one of his colleagues were being treated really badly. And then he said, for a moment, he looked into the eyes of the perpetrator. He could see their dignity. You know, he could see there was something that he saw that made him realize that this is a human being too, who's perpetrating these, you know, indignities on us. And I just thought, my God, that is so incredibly evolved. You know,
Yeah.
it's incredibly evolved to be able to see that. Even he said it was just a flash sometimes. So that was from the book, but just from watching him, observing him as a politician, and how he was able to, you know, forgive the people who treated him so badly, and especially in Robben Island, when he came out smiling. You know, I have a slide of him just with this walk coming out of the prison, and he's got this big, beautiful smile on his face. And I thought, well, this is what Tutu means. It's our duty to be joyful, you know?
Absolutely. Could you share with us and our audience, what is the significance of that moment, his first day of parole in Robben Island?
Well, this was one of the reasons Desmond Tutu said to me, you go and you read Nelson Mandela's autobiography. When we were talking about dignity, and we had many, many, many conversations about dignity in those days, the two entire weeks we were together there. And so when I got back home, I read the book, and the passage that really stood out to me was when he was describing what it was like going into Robben Island for the first time, and what he was experiencing in that moment. And what he described was that the guards, they were all just, you know, trying to strip them of their dignity. They were treating them like dogs, like animals. And I figured out, he said, I knew I had to figure out what the guards were up to. And once it didn't take them but 20 minutes, maybe, not even, to figure out what the guards were up to and how they were going to treat them. He said, oh, this is interesting. I feel okay about this, because what they're trying to do is strip us of our dignity. But nobody, he said, it's a wonderful passage in the book. He said, nobody is going to take my dignity away from me. No one. And that he said, it's in my hands. My dignity and our dignity is in our hands, and our hands only, and no man or no institution is going to touch that unless we let it go. So he said, it's mine. Nobody's going to touch my dignity. And that was a big learning moment. And it was what the Arch was trying to instill in me too, because there was a time where before that I thought that people did have the power to strip us of our dignity. But what Tutu and Mandela both made this distinction between having an insult to your dignity, being treated badly, does not mean you lose your dignity. It means you've had your dignity injured, and you need to heal from that. And so the other part of the learning there, Anne, was we can't ignore those dignity violations. We can't ignore those insults either. We have to take care of them. And that led to a whole other dimension of what does healing look like from these indignities.
Yeah. And of course, what I found significant about that story too, Donna, is that Mandela established that precedent on day one. Before we turn to some of the bigger leadership issues, can you share with us around healing? What for you are the key steps people can follow in order to heal?
As the Arch pointed out, it's really important to get acknowledgement for the suffering that we've endured from these violations.
But if people aren't willing to acknowledge, I mean, that then is
no, it doesn't have to be the person who did the perpetrator. It could be you and me. let's say we meet with a group of people, you and I, who have been suffering terribly. Our first job is to acknowledge that it's what I did with the Palestinian when he got up and he walked out. I knew I wasn't the one who, made him get up and walk out, but I had the power to help him believe that somebody is seeing him, somebody's hearing him, and what happened was wrong, that you should have not been treated that way. So that's one of the first steps. And this is what, the Arch said, people need to hear from somebody. It doesn't even have to be the person who did it, that what happened to you was wrong, in order to let go. And the other thing is really critically important that I have found is to not keep those dignity insults inside you. Now, we have a tendency, we humans, to not talk about times when we've been so humiliated because it's embarrassing. It feels very embarrassing to talk about it with others, but it is opening the door and letting out that story about what happened to you to whomever. I mean, I talk about making sure that you have a dignity buddy, somebody that you can turn to, somebody you really trust, that you can and feel safe with, that you can turn to and talk about that. And because there's research, one of my colleagues at Columbia University has done the work to show that when you can externalize an event, something that happens to you, like a dignity violation, if you can talk about it and get it outside of you, it's the pathway to healing. And just keeping it inside to fester and to, we ruminate over these things, but getting it out there, externalizing it, and it gives it a sense of validation that what happened to you was wrong. Yes. So that, and never, ever keep it silent. I mean, you've got to find somebody. And yes, professionals are really important to, professional trauma healers, for example, or psychiatrists, psychologists, people who are trained, and everyday people like you and me. We can do this too. We can help people by acknowledging them, letting them tell their story, and making it feel safe for them to talk about something horrific. So we can all play a part in that healing process, but we need to do it together. You can't just do it alone. It's too hard.
Yeah. That's an important point. Coming back to leadership, what do you believe are the biggest leadership challenges we face, not only in the United States today? We're living through very turbulent times, but also in the world. You've worked around the world. So for you, Donna, what are the big things that keep you awake, concerned?
Yeah. Well, so when I talk about leadership, I talk about the need to understand dignity at two levels. One is, as a leader, you need to be able to interpersonally interact with people in a way that doesn't violate their dignity. You need to be able to honor their dignity. But there's another level, which is the more destructive level in some ways, and that is the structural indignities that we are seeing all over the world now. Whether it's racism here in this country that we're grappling with, the structural, systemic ways in which we devalue some people and increase the value in others, like the superiority dynamic that you were pointing out just a bit ago. So there's those bigger structural issues that we absolutely have to work on. And again, racism is one, but it's not the only ism. There's still, women are still being treated as less than. But when you talk about Europe now, looking at Ukraine and Russia, I mean, there's no dignity. The absence of dignity there is astonishing. And how do we get a leadership that can navigate that level? Those external sources of indignities it's almost like beyond any one human being's control. So those are the ones. So I think what we really have to do as a community, whether it's the Western world or whatever community, whatever we can do to garner support for one another. This isn't something that just Ukraine can do alone and counteract those forces. So we have to work together, which is what the West is doing. The West is doing that. And I feel confident that, once we can get the violence to stop, the first order of business in these systemic issues is getting the violence to stop. And then maybe we could go in at some point down the road and talk about dignity. I mean, I would love to see a dignity program in Russia with, let's say we have a new administration in Russia and people who are very dignity conscious, because there are a lot of dignity conscious people citizens in Russia. I know them. Yeah. So how can we get that? How can we elevate dignity once the violence stops and make it so clear and show the world that our humanity should be our first order of business, and working out the politics is the second. But that's my fantasy. It's a fantasy. It probably never happened in our lifetime, and I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not so sure, Donna. I'm not so
hope
sure.
so.
Dream big, and as our good friend Nelson Mandela always said, it always seems impossible until it is done. So never give up the dream.
No, it's true. That's what Winston Churchill said, never, 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 never give up. So I believe that too. I just see so much suffering now in the world, even from cataclysmic experiences like that earthquake. I mean, it feels so helpless. What do we do? How do we, anyway? So, but I do want to make that distinction between those systemic forces. I mean, it's just like apartheid in South Africa. You couldn't just have people learn how to treat each other with dignity without the systemic changes that were absolutely necessary. Getting rid of that superiority-inferiority divide.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. Turning now to what the Arch clearly left you with in terms of our duty to be joyful. I'd love you to share 3 fun facts about you. Where is your favorite place to holiday and why?
Well, that's a tough one because I've been all over the world, and I just have so many fond memories of, I think about Sri Lanka, I think about Cambodia, where I spent a summer and had the most extraordinary experiences there. But now at this point in my life, I think, my husband and I have a summer home in Maine. If we want to get rather mundane here, we go up there and we have the most joyful time. We actually spent the pandemic up in Maine, and it's a very rural area. We're right on the water, and so we had the advantage of being out in nature the whole time during the pandemic. Whereas here, where we are in Boston, it's houses are right up next to each other, and we were afraid to go into the supermarket. We didn't want to go out. But up there, we had such a wonderful time learning about birds. We learned about all of the trees that were surrounded. We just took the time to reconnect with nature. I don't know, it sounds so silly, but I feel like now that I feel so much more a part of my natural world because I have paid homage to it, and I was so grateful to it to have that beautiful environment when everybody was suffering so much here in these big cities. So that was great. I think I'll leave Maine up there as one of my favorite places.
That's wonderful. In the Northeast, yeah. And what joyful moment stands out about your childhood?
Oh, my grandparents. Honestly, if it weren't for my grandparents, I wouldn't be here today. I had a Dutch grandmother, and my grandfather, he was from British descent, and the two of them just, as much as in my biological first family, it was harsh and conflict-ridden, they just focused on us as children. We had our own toys, we had our own bedroom, and so my grandparents taught me about joy. Absolutely. They took us on holidays. They did all the things.
Were those your maternal or paternal grandparents? Or
my paternal. Yeah. My paternal. Yeah.
Okay. What is one thing people don't really know about you?
People in my world today don't know that story about my family of origin. They don't know what really rooted in my passion for dignity. And as I said, I started out by telling you, it's been following me around all my life. I just think they see this successful Harvard person and, doing all this wonderful stuff all over the world. And I think most people just don't, now all your viewers will know, but don't know that it came out of a lot of suffering. My wisdom and my insight about about dignity really came from a deep place of suffering as a child.
Yeah. And what remarkable work you're doing, Donna. I have huge admiration and respect. And in our kind of final few minutes, any message you think that you would like to leave for our generation, around the future of leadership? And what is your message to our generation? What is your message to the next generation?
One of the things I feel strongly about now at this point in my life, I'm 72 years old, and I want to think about how we can continue this work when I'm not here, and I have been working with a lot of young people, and in particular, a lot of young men, surprisingly. I mean, I work with young women as well, but I'm mentoring a lot of young men, and who I think, they're hungry for something new and something different, a new narrative about who they are as human beings, this whole masculine feminine divide that we grew up with, and yeah. I think they're looking for something so much more inclusive in terms of who they are, how they want to be in the world, how they want to have families, how they want to teach, how they want to do the work they're doing. And I think I just feel so grateful that they have this desire to see a different kind of future, that different from the expectations that we had. And I do believe that dignity is at the core of it. I mean, that's why they contact me, because they said they believe in this notion that we all have dignity, and what's the world going to look like if we really accepted that. I work with a lot of people of color,
yes,
on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And that's a big one for me, wanting to be able to give people, people who are working in that field, the tools. And now so many of them are talking not about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they're talking about it as dignity, equity, and inclusion, and using the dignity framing. So yes. For me, that is a way of taking our legacy, the legacy of what we left, or my legacy with the dignity work, and transforming that sense of who we are as a humanity, who we are, I mean, not as a humanity, but who we are as human beings and as a human species. Yes. I'm wanting to see an evolution of our understanding of what it means to be human. And yeah. I think if we could get dignity into the consciousness of everybody, we're going to see a different world.
Well, it kind of leaves me with another thought and a kind of final question around, when we talk about the evolution, if we turn to a man who was called the revolutionary, the revolutionary terrorist Mandela, any final thoughts you think he would share about the future of leadership? And not only him, but of course, as we said, him and the Arch, who had such a close friendship and worked in partnerships. So any final words about the future of leadership in terms of Mandela's legacy and in terms of the Arch's legacy?
Well, I would just hope that not just you and I, but I would just hope that the world learns more about, and that this is what you're doing, Anne, learns more about Mandela's blueprint and the Tutus of the world, because there's others too, but yes. Mandela and Tutu, I think, stand out significantly for their leadership courage and their humility. Those two things, they realized that it takes strength to be vulnerable. They both yes. realized that vulnerability is not weakness. Saying, I forgive you is not weakness. Yes. Saying, I want to transform our relationship into one where we're, honoring each other's dignity. Those sorts of enormous leadership challenges that they demonstrated, both of them, on a daily basis. I mean, you know, Tutu always says there's no future without forgiveness. And it takes so much to do that forgiveness work and that reconciliation and to repair relationships that have broken under the weight of conflict. And they have shown us the way. But I'm not 100% sure the whole world is aware of exactly what they did behind the scenes and even out in the light of day. So I just want you to keep continuing this work about his blueprint and writing about it and include Tutu in there too when you talk about
absolutely. Well, we're doing this together, Donna. So.
Yes. But I want the world to know more about the profundity and the extraordinary human efforts that went into being who those two were.
Yeah, and you know, Donna, on that note, I'm profoundly grateful that our paths crossed, and I'm so excited that we're going to be doing this work together because you know, like you, I absolutely, having lived through the apartheid experience and the transformation, and listening to you, your remarkable stories, working with the wonderful Arch, you know, I so look forward to us building this movement out together in the world. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for your dignity. Thank you for the message of dignity for the world.
You're welcome.
Dignity consciousness, or what Harvard's international expert on conflict resolution, Dr. Donna Hicks, calls Mandela Consciousness, ensures that nobody can take away your dignity. Dignity is your inherent value or worth. You're born with it. Different to respect, which is earned. We may be different and unequal in positions of power, but we are all equal in dignity. This is beautifully captured in the lyrics of George Benson's Greatest Love of All. He sang, "I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. Should I fail or I succeed, at least I lived as I believe. No matter what they take from me, they can't take away my dignity, because the greatest love of all is happening to me. I found the greatest love of all inside of me." We're living in a world in chaos, crisis, and conflict. Donna's remarkable high-impact international work with the late and great South Africa's Archbishop Desmond Tutu in a BBC series on conflict resolution in Northern Ireland, coupled with her work in other countries like Israel, Palestine, Libya, North and South America, Cuba, Colombia, Sri Lanka, and many more, highlights the role of dignity and indignities in creating and resolving conflict. Dignity is the unspoken human conversation. How to lead with dignity creates a pivotal new pathway in how to prevent and resolve current conflicts worldwide, both large and small. It helps us redesign systemic structural indignities. It helps us heal personal indignities. And it also helps organizations create cultures to evoke the best in all people. Acknowledging another's dignity, resisting the temptation to violate another's dignity, and repairing dignity violations can and will heal our deep divides. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one bold step at a time. One step for you, but together, a giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog, and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on ann-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.